Hello, and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. Thank you for joining me. On the show today, I wanted to discuss Trump's threats to impose tariffs on European countries that oppose his Greenland annexation. Now, the recent buzz in the news is that Donald Trump has threatened to impose a 10% tariff on European countries, including the Scandinavian countries, Germany, the Netherlands, France, the United Kingdom, and Finland, on goods they export to the US if they persist on opposing his annexation or his move to annex the territory of Greenland. These tariffs are set to be implemented from the 1st of February.
Now, several European leaders have pushed back against US President Donald Trump's threat to impose new 10% tariffs on imports from their countries as punishment for opposing his plans to annex Greenland. Scandinavian nations, plus Germany, France, the Netherlands and the UK and Finland are all affected by the punitive tariff hike.
Greenlanders have come out in support of a block to the United States pressure regarding the annexation of their country.
Comes amid protests in Nuuk, Greenland's capital, where several thousand people took to the streets on Saturday. The protesters chanted slogans and sang traditional Inuit songs. Thousands also turned out in the Danish capital, Copenhagen, and several other Danish cities. Greenland is an autonomous territory within Denmark.
Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I've said it before in a previous Greenland video that I will post somewhere up here, that Donald Trump is hell-bent on acquiring the territory of Greenland. And he will certainly have it one way or another. I know that the EU have this bazooka trade policy that they're referring to that they think is going to be the saving grace, which they can use to apply pressure on the United States economically. Personally, I don't think that that's going to have any effect on Trump's desire to acquire Greenland. I think it's a foregone conclusion and it's something that he set his mind on, and it's something he's going to achieve.
So we're going to be doing something with Greenland, either the nice way or the more difficult way.
Now, according to the current treaty, the 1951 Defense of Greenland Treaty, broadly speaking, the US has a right to the use of the territory of Greenland. There's a few do's and don'ts that they have to abide by. But the large part of it and the most important aspect of that treaty is that the United States enjoys a right to exist in Greenland as long as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is still in existence. So plainly, this means that if there's no NATO, then the United States have no legal right to a presence in Greenland. Now, this is important because the European leaders say that they don't understand why Donald Trump wants to annex Greenland, as the US already enjoys a presence there. This is somewhat of a misrepresentation and a simplification of the facts, because Europe knows full well that Trump has been harping on about the United States exiting NATO.
Pull out of NATO if it doesn't help you acquire Greenland. If it doesn't lead the way.
Well, we're going to see. NATO has been dealing with us on Greenland. We need Greenland for national security very badly. If we don't have it, we have a big hole in national security, especially when it comes to what we're doing in terms of the Golden Dome and all of the other things. We have a lot.
In fact, the Americans have urged the Germans to take a more proactive and leading role within NATO.
US Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker has suggested that Germany should eventually take over the alliance's top military role, signaling a potential shift in American leadership. Whitaker said he looks forward to the day Germany says it's ready to take over the Supreme Allied Commander position, known as SACEUR. He acknowledged this is a long-term aspirational goal, but emphasized that Washington wants European military capabilities to equal those of the US. Traditionally, the SACEUR role has always been held by a US general commanding both NATO forces and American troops in Europe. However, a German expert told Euronews that a European commander would no longer have authority over US troops, complicating the dual-headed nature of the role. Whitaker's comment comes amid fears of a US retreat from European security, highlighted by a proposed peace plan for Ukraine that is seen as yet another sign of Washington stepping back from its leadership role in NATO.
So the Europeans are fully aware that at some point Trump will remove the United States from NATO. Now, a NATO without the United States is a toothless tiger, all bark and no bite. And Trump is aware of that, which would then probably lead to NATO's dissolution. If this does happen, the US has lost any right to the territory of Greenland by way of its presence there. So that is why I firmly believe that Donald Trump is pushing adamantly to acquire Greenland as an American territory, because it then cements United States presence in Greenland in perpetuity. Currently they pay no taxes and rent, and there's no lease, there's no expiration date on the lease. However, should NATO dissolve, then the lease becomes null and void. Further, if you remember, or if you recall, in a press briefing that Trump did, or when he was asked by the reporters regarding Greenland, he said specifically that you would not protect something that you lease in the same way as you would protect something that you own. So those are quite telling words from Trump, once again indicating his desire to move ahead with the annexation of Greenland. So once again, if you have NATO dissolving and the US having no access to Greenland, then currently, as we speak, at the current moment, when a superpower feels it needs to act and feels threatened and sees that all the options on the table are rapidly diminishing, then what do you think a superpower is going to do? It's going to resort to brute force. And as you've seen from Trump's behavior recently and everything he's done, especially in this second term, it's might equals right. Brute force is the answer. And, the American military being what they are, I really do not think that the Europeans have a leg to stand on in this regard. They just wouldn't be able to match what the US military might would bring to the table. Trump is also very cleverly and craftily driving a wedge between the European powers. He knows, for example, that the Hungarians are not too fond of their Western European colleagues' general policies. So there's a lot of differences there. There's a lot of, the directions in which most Western European governments are pulling and the Hungarian government is moving are quite opposite each other. So if Trump can widen the gap between these powers, you could possibly also see a breakup of the European Union, which for the United States wouldn't be such a bad thing, because they'd be able to then deal independently with each European state, and it gives them a lot more bargaining power. So it's the old adage of divide and conquer. Trump is also citing national security concerns. This means, if you read between the lines, what he's basically saying is he does not believe that NATO in its current form has the capacity to protect Greenland and the United States' interests within the region. And he's obviously looking at it from a standpoint where the United States has exited NATO. What then happens? NATO is going to be woefully unprepared to deal with any threats that might arise from China or Russia. So he's already brought onto the table the national security issue. By the United States acquiring Greenland, it's another move up the ladder, or the escalation ladder, in the containment of China. Because as the ice in the Arctic region melts, you find new waterways are open and new trade routes become open. Now, the United States is already severely hampering Chinese expansion and movement along the String of Pearls. If it can hamper movement in this direction, namely Greenland, then you find that the Chinese are being contained even further. And if you look at the change of government in Venezuela, if Iran has to fall, you'll have a government in Iran that would most probably be more amenable to the United States than the current regime, which then means that, like Venezuela, the Americans control the oil flow out of Venezuela and out of Iran. And between Venezuela and Iran, they account for quite a bit of China's oil purchases, which China is currently making at discounted prices. So Trump will probably say to them, yeah, you can buy from me, like what he's doing in Venezuela. However, he'll set the price. And also, they control the tap. So the tap can be turned off at any time. There's also talk of supposed rare earth minerals that lie beneath Greenland. There's no way the Americans are going to allow the Chinese, or the Russians for that matter, to extend their influence into that region and begin mining operations there, which would then be seen again as a national security issue. So, Trump is definitely laying down his case. And the more he reveals, the more solid it's looking in terms of what he's prepared to do to acquire Greenland. So looking at it, he will have Greenland. I can't stress this enough. He will have Greenland one way or another. And whilst I sympathize with the Greenlanders, the writing is on the wall. This is the brutal nature of geopolitics. You find that within the United States, there's some pushback to Trump's Greenland move coming from both Republican and Democrat senators and representatives. However, this once again is just for optics and just for tokenism, because I think the American population by and large are more concerned with domestic issues rather than American foreign policy. They've got a lot more to deal with at home than worry about what's going on in Greenland. So while they're out on the streets, and we've seen this time and time again, protests, and you allowed your little bit, your 2 cents worth, go out there, protest, and that's about it. We'll still do what we want, and that's the way the administrations have always worked. When you look at Trump citing Greenland as a national security threat, and that being his reason to annex it, I'm further convinced that even if Trump were out of power, the next administration coming in will follow the same policies, albeit not as brash and as public as Trump's methods, because the threat will always be there. Once he's highlighted the threat surrounding the United States by way of Greenland as being perpetuated by the Chinese and the Russians, then, it's going to be hard for any other subsequent US administration to walk back on that. Trump says he doesn't want Russia as a neighbor.
And we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor.
But, he already has. You just got to look at the Bering Strait. Across from mainland Russia, you have the Bering Strait. And across the Bering Strait is Alaska, which is United States sovereign territory. I come back to my emphasis that whilst he probably does see Russia as a threat, I don't believe that he sees Russia as much a threat as he does China. And this, I think, is symbolic in the nature of the meeting, or the place where the meeting was held between him and Vladimir Putin when he first came into power, when Trump first came into power regarding Ukraine. I believe he had the meeting in Alaska, and the location is what was important, not what was said, because the takeaway from Alaska was that probably nothing material or nothing concrete came out of that. However, I think visually it was extremely important, because standing on Alaskan territory, having this meeting with Putin, he signaled to the world that this area is of vital importance, strategic importance to the United States. But also what I believe is, between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, they reaffirmed their commitment to probably a deal that they had done earlier, where And I speculate on this, but where I believe Trump realized that Ukraine is somewhere he's not interested in, and as most people agree, Ukraine doesn't pose an existential threat to the United States, so he just couldn't be bothered. I think he ceded that to the Russians because it is an existential threat to the Russians. However, I think Vladimir Putin has agreed to allow Trump to then stabilize the American hemisphere. And that would include what is going on in Greenland. And it works for Putin as well, because whilst Russia and China seem to be buddies and seem to be allies, there is an enmity that lies between these two countries. And China does have an existing border issue that, well, one of many that it has with Russia. So it's a win for Putin in a sense that he's helping the United States fortify that region against China, which then stems Chinese growth. Because, to be honest, the Russians don't want to play second fiddle to the Chinese, and they don't want to be a junior partner to any other power in the world. They believe that they have this great culture, this great civilization, and they are a great country that needs to be respected, and he wants to be viewed equally as any other major country in the world. So I think that in that respect, it's a win for Putin as well. As for those that say that, Donald Trump won't get the Nobel Peace Prize, well, there's a news flash for you. Machado has already visited the United States. She's presented her Nobel Peace Prize to Donald Trump. Now, let's look at the Nobel Committee. The Nobel Committee says that once it's awarded to somebody, it cannot be transferred. That doesn't matter to Trump. Look at everything he's done. Look at everything that he stands for. He has things his way or the highway. It's clear and simple. If he's not in favor of something, he withdraws from that treaty. That's it. He doesn't care what people think. It's what he does what he wants to do. So the Nobel Committee, in this respect, are irrelevant. It's a visual thing. What people will remember many years later is the photographs of him receiving the Nobel Prize from Machado. And if anything, at the worst, it's created controversy. Well, who's the king of controversy? Trump is. So it's a win for him because it plays to his ego. He's won on every field. There's nothing that they can throw at him now. The Nobel Committee can throw at him now and say, well, we don't recognize this. Because playing into that controversy actually helps enforce the myth. I think it's pertinent at this time to remind Greenlanders, but also allies of the United States, of what the late Henry Kissinger had to say about friends and enemies of the United States of America. So I'll just leave these two quotations here for you to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this little show, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, as it helps our channel grow and it helps us with the algorithm. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.